Here's another one that historians like to pounce on from Barbara Bush, always sort of minimizing her role in her husband's administration, dating back to when he first ran for Congress, failed at his first shot at it there eventually, did okay for himself as time went on. She said, you have to have influence. This is back in 1992, when you've been married 47 years at the time. If you don't have any influence, then I really think you're in deep trouble. I want to get the read on all of that from presidential historian Doug Wead, who's written extensively about Barbara Bush, first ladies, presidents, you name it. One of the best I know. Doug, thank you for taking the time.
Hey, thanks for having me, Neil.
Looking back at her, and on that self-deprecating wit, I know a lot of women certainly related to her, as I think it was the New York Times said, her realness. How about you?
Yes, she's very direct. She was very funny. I tried to think back over jokes she told. I could only remember a couple of jokes, so it wasn't jokes. It was her wit. She was like an Oscar Wilde and maybe a tad of Rickles. She could poke you. So it was amazing, and she felt a little bit of the burden of that. I remember one day her saying, "Oh, I don't want to meet her." I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, she says I'm funny. Every time we meet, she says, 'Oh, you're so funny,' and it puts pressure on me. How can you make yourself be funny?" So she knew.
You know, you've written about this as well, but the role of first ladies who are ultimately their protectors. Peggy Noonan writes about this time soon enough when the roles are reversed and they're going to be first men. And she writes today, sooner than you think, they will be in that same role for their spouse, but that they are great protectors in that regard, Democrat or Republican. She, too, of her husband, George H.W. Bush. How much of a role did she play compared, let's say, to her predecessor, Nancy Reagan? And where does she stack up among those who looked out for their husbands and looked out for their history?
Well, she won't like this one bit, but I think she's one of the greatest women who ever lived, either that or the luckiest, because two sons were governor, married to a president, and had a son who was president. There's never been anything quite like that. She's compared to Abigail Adams, but Abigail Adams didn't know it. She died in 1818. Her son became president in 1825, and Abigail Adams did bury three of her children, one who died young as an alcoholic, a young man. And you can't compare her to Eleanor Roosevelt, who had 5 children, who had 19 marriages between them. She was not first mom. But here's a woman, Barbara Bush, who everyone around her was successful. So it's not an accident of history. She did some things right.
Yeah, you know, you think about iconic American dynasties, families, whether you want to look at the Roosevelts or the Kennedys, certainly the Bush family would qualify there. They come from a great deal of money. Barbara Bush herself personally came from a great deal of money. And they could have chosen a variety of other routes, but public service was sort of ingrained. And I'm wondering that's a common theme among these patriarchal families, huh?
Yeah, it is. And they felt they had an obligation, that it was what they were supposed to do. I think the key in understanding Barbara Bush and the success of her family is her relationship with her mother. Her mother was very preoccupied with details and trivialities and easily hurt and held grudges and was just miserable, and at least in the mind of Barbara Bush, because she told me about it and wrote about it herself. And she decided she was going to lighten up. She was going to enjoy life, and her revenge was to have fun. The one exception is the books. I noticed, you know, the whole literacy thing, the one moment she could really feel loved was when her mother read books to her at night. And I think that's at the heart of why she fell in love with books and read so many and then started this whole literacy thing.
It was amazing. I know you'll be sticking around. I look forward to that. Again, as a nation stops to remember a remarkable woman, whether Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal, just her self-deprecating wit and humor. So many stories I see here, and I was doing a little bit of research last night preparing for this show. She once famously said, "What you see is what you got." Her husband immediately chimed in, "And I like what I got." We'll have more after this.